Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Top of the evening to you, or top of the morning.
Or good afternoon.
This is Story by Story.
Sharing the human experience.
I'm Joe Doolittle.
I'm Kate Dudding.
And we are storytellers. And we also are producers. And I suppose we could say authors, and we could say quite a lot. But what we really want to share with you is that this is the month of March. And March brings a lot of things. It brings spring.
I mean, yeah, at least on the calendar.
If we're lucky. And
actually, I have snowdrops that always bloom in March. It might be the last day, and snowdrops are little bitty flowers. The stalks are only this big, and the blossoms are only about this big. But it's enough to give me hope that, yes, plants are coming alive.
So we have hope for spring in March. Mm-hmm. We have a bunch of other things, but more importantly, we have St. Patrick's Day, and we kind of celebrate, along with spring, many things Irish, for there are many Irish things to celebrate. We have a guest teller who is part of that celebration. We'll come to her in just a little bit, but first we're going to just kind of schmooze a little bit about what you've been doing.
Okay, I just told my Julia Child program again. It's stories about Julia Child and her husband Paul, what they did before she became Julia Child, if you will.
Oh, really?
And how they thrived afterwards.
Was she a great basketball player? Because I know she was tall.
I don't think so. Part of, what she did at Smith College, I don't think basketball was in there. There was hockey and tennis. There were riding, baseball, but I don't think
But she was pretty athletic, wasn't she? I mean,
yes, she was a tomboy.
I bet.
A 6'2" tomboy by the time she was fully grown.
Wasn't she also a spy?
Almost.
An almost spy.
She worked for the OSS. That's where she and her husband met during World War II in India. But in the movie Julie and Julia and in other places, she said, "Oh, I was a file clerk." Well, she was much more than that. In the OSS, they had spies all over Asia. And so they had reports coming in from them. They had reports coming in from Washington. They needed to get to the right people, circulated. And Julia read all of these. So she was an information officer, as I understand it.
She was and the term in the spy trade is she was a handler?
I don't know about that, but all the information came in. She came up with a system of numbering and cataloging them so that all the information would get circulated to all the pertinent people. And by the time she was, they were first together in India, and then they moved to China. In China, she had a staff of 10 working under her. So file clerk is quite an understatement.
Wow. Well, sometime we will invite Julia to join us here and maybe have a couple of her stories, because it is a remarkable person that Kate personifies when she does this, and some wonderful, wonderful, great lines that make you laugh and smile and feel good about both Julia and the world that she kind of lived in and came from and stuff. It's a great, great story.
Just a little, which I know the one that you're thinking of, is that she met a stranger in an airport wearing a cowboy hat and cowboy boots, and he recognized her and he said, "Bon appetit, Julia." And she looked at him and smiled and said, "Bon appetit to you too."
Well, there goes the family show element right now. I mean, that's what I was thinking of. But you've just had a good example of how we can almost tell a story without almost telling the story, and that's really pretty good.
That's the punchline.
That's the punchline. Yeah. And I had a big month. Really a wonderful couple of months with some wonderful things up at Cafe Lena, where I was a featured teller. And the open mic at Cafe Lena in Saratoga is on our Story Circle at proctors.org website. If you want to know more about that, we'll come to that. But that was just a great experience. And then I told Three Spirits, did a wonderful program for the Hamilton Hill Arts Center and their new brass jazz band, a la New Orleans. And I had a bucket list moment. I actually put on a red nose, and I had red noses for everybody there, and I had my own band. And I asked everybody to join me in parading around the ballroom at the Glenn Sanders Mansion in a red nose with the band and some of them on their kazoos playing when the Saints go marching in. And there's a link on YouTube, and I will send that out so you can see it, because it was just one of those moments that I suppose you had to be there for, but it was just great.
I'll get that in a slide.
Okay.
So that you too can experience that.
Right, and we raised, just off of this, if you're ever looking for a fundraiser, we raised about $1,500, and that covered the cost of dinner. And that was just because people were generous, and the idea of those kids taking on that band was a positive, affirming thing.
It was a really sweet moment when I would say it was like 2/3 adult players and 3 or 4 kids.
Yeah.
And I saw one moment when an adult on a trombone started a dueling banjo kind of thing. He did a little ditty on his, and then he looked at his younger companion, urging him on to do something. And they went back and forth several times, and that was very sweet.
The kid was a 7th grader at Central Park High School, and the adult trumpet player was the chairman of the music department at SUNY Oneonta. And so we had a really good range of mentors who were involved in working with these kids, and they all had a blast. Man. And if you want to know more about that, it's Capital District Jazz Limited. If you Google that, you'll come up with the program and what the mentors and the kids are doing. It's a great idea. And so that's what we've been doing, and there's been a lot of things that have been happening in storytelling. I also went for the first time to that front porch storytelling, which is a little bit like The Moth in a way. It's a lot of personal stories. But it's the first time in my life I think I've been the oldest person in the room by more than one generation. But they're young, they love to drink beer and eat hamburgers, and they meet at that old English pub down at Quackenbush Square on the second Monday of the month.
Front parlor storytelling.
Yeah. And they've been at the Egg, or not the Egg, they've been at the Linda in February. So file that one away and look at that.
They're also in Lansingburg.
Right, they're up in the Berg. The other month they're not in Albany, and we don't know.
No, two different times during the month.
Okay.
And they have wonderful wings there, like deep fried wings. Oh my word.
Julia Child would be.
Well, yeah. If your cholesterol level is low, that's where you need to go.
Right. We should all have low cholesterol.
But the stories were wonderful, and the organizer, Abby Lubin, for the Troy one, is definitely trying to create a community. And so, unlike The Moth, where the stories are judged, and there's a winner, there's no judging in Troy. So it's for people to share their own personal stories. And there's a topic every month, and
it is a real community. I felt a little bit like I was old, but I was folded in and welcomed, and had good conversation.
Given a seat, your walker was given a place.
That's right.
Of
I
honor.
didn't have to worry about where my walker was parked. It was just really nice. At any rate, boy, I stepped right into that generational thing, didn't I? We want to put a little frame around our guest teller. Mary Murphy is a person that I've learned a great deal from, just listening to her and watching her tell, and I'm always amazed at the many things she can change in the course of a story. Her face changes, her body moves in ways that emulate a pretzel. She's quite remarkable. And she's quite schooled and aware of the power of the words she's using. She's also a very good coach. She works with children at the Well, which is some of the kids that are learning how to tell stories from various faith backgrounds. And you can see the touch and the voice of Mary in those kids as they tell. And that's a great reverberation for any of us who like to think we have influence in the world we live in. Do you have anything else we should say about Mary before we introduce?
Well, she's a lousy person. No. She's a delightful
I
person.
respect that.
And we brought her.
It just seemed so sweet
Well,
that I couldn't resist.
And we invited her here because of St. Patrick's Day and things Irish, but she's a lot more involved in storytelling than just Irish stories. And we're going to find out a little bit more about that and Mary Murphy right now. Welcome, Mary.
Well, thank you very much for having me, both of you.
Yes. Oh, and you have a recipe for groundhog stew.
I
for
do.
people who it's a little late for celebrating Groundhog Day that way, but
The better name for it is woodchuck. You know,
Woodchuck.
woodchuck and groundhog mean the same thing. And I do have a story about eating a woodchuck one time, but that's for another February.
Another February. You eating woodchuck. You know, the Native Americans were very fond of woodchuck.
Were they?
Yes. They, but that's another story too, I suppose.
They probably ate all that small game, right?
yeah.
Well, that was easier to catch than some of the big game.
Right.
I mean, that's why it got on the menu. You know?
Right.
And they didn't have any Julia Child to help them, make béarnaise sauce for it either.
That's right.
Mary, tell us a little bit about how you came into stories and storytelling, because I guess one of the questions I'd like to hear, and I haven't ever asked you this, is when did you kind of figure out that you were a storyteller?
Well, it was a long time ago, and actually, I never even heard of storytelling, and it didn't mean much to me. In my family, we had the kind of stories you were talking about with the front parlor storytelling. My mother was a great storyteller, and she would tell the story of her day, or tell the story of she saw an accident, and she'd embellish it, and she'd elaborate and exaggerate, and I would say, "Oh, Mom!" And if she did that in someone else's company, and I was the person who was with her at the time, and I heard her say, "Oh, well, then he crossed the street. He made such a face, and he was terrible." I would say, "It didn't happen that way. Oh, Mom, you're exaggerating. It didn't happen that way." But really, in her mind, it did happen that way because she was a storyteller, and she processed everything that she did in her daily life into a story. And so while we never knew folk tales or fairy tales, really, we knew that kind of personal story. And I began to, of course, value it as I got older and older. So that's just to say that I didn't come into it as a librarian or a teacher or anything like that, but I was always interested in acting. And when I got old enough, and I took I was at Onondaga Community College in Syracuse as a drama major. They don't even have a drama major anymore, but it was great while it lasted. And then I went to the College of St. Rose, also as a drama major or theater English. And then I went to the big city of New York because my Aunt Dorothy, Sister Dorothy Flood, was going down to get a PhD at Columbia University. And I went down and lived with her, and I auditioned, and I was in I was in the Light Opera of Manhattan. I actually sang every single night in the Light Opera of Manhattan, but never solo, always in the chorus. But we did a lot of Gilbert and Sullivan,
Fun.
and Naughty Marietta, all that kind of thing. And I loved it. I loved it while I was doing it, and I took singing lessons and acting lessons, and eventually I met Leo Wong. And Leo and I, as you well know, are married now. But we met in New York City, and we met at Columbia because I was working at a job at Columbia, and that's where I saw him. And when we did, in my mind anyway, I began to think about leaving New York. And for many, many reasons, we did leave, and we came back up to Albany, where my aunt was now teaching at the College of St. Rose. And so that's to say that I needed some kind of performing. Like Kate was saying earlier before we started the taping, sometimes you need a story. And I needed a place to do some performing. And I didn't want to be in community theater. I wanted to set my own hours, and I wanted to actually try and make a living. So gradually, I found the poetry of Shel Silverstein, the late Shel Silverstein, And I found them to be so funny, reading them aloud, and I thought of an audience of kids, students in school. And so I used his poems to sort of jumpstart me into a career of doing a one-woman show. I called my first one-woman show, Fried Fishes Taste Delicious.
Fried fishes taste delicious.
Yes, it was great because somebody I worked with at St. Rose actually drew a picture of a frying pan with a fish sort of curled up cooking, but smiling in the picture, and then I made some cards out of that. Fried fish, storytelling, Mary.
Fried fishes taste delicious.
Right.
That's
right.
not too bad. I like it. I like it.
But as you all know, copyrighted material is not really the thing to do if you're going to continue with any regularity. And so I had to go away from Shel Silverstein, and I went to the library and I began seeing all these folk tales and realizing fairy tales, and that they're great. That's number one. Some I'd never read, some I'd never heard of. I heard of Grimm fairy tales and Anderson and the like, but I found that wonderful world that you all know about and have known about called storytelling and all the public domain work.
398.2.
398.2, yeah, I was just
in your
downstairs
library,
looking at that. Yes, so of course there's a wealth of material. And I began to tell, I think I started with Rip Van Winkle
Great stuff.
and the Headless Horseman. And when I started, I thought, well, this is like theater. I've got to memorize it. So Rip Van Winkle is a big story, and I memorized every single word.
Bless your
Bless
heart.
Bless
your
my
heart.
little heart, yes.
And
Because-
you're
You and Kent Bushman, he can do it too, right?
Oh, Lord. Yeah, you got to have a photographic memory in order to do it. But it was hard work, so I did that. And actually, a woman in Voorheesville, I can't remember her name, she was a librarian, and she gave me my first show. And I did those stories, and I found a few more, and some poems that were also in the public domain, and I just took off. It was mostly word of mouth, and coming up with different stories for different occasions. And I left that one-woman show idea behind, and now tailor my shows to meet the audience's needs, the same way you do when you're telling stories. And eventually, I don't know what got into me, but because I was never much of a writer before, but I began to write and tell my own stories. And I do that a lot now, too,
Right.
especially for older audiences, senior citizens, adults.
You don't have to look over here when you talk about senior
Well,
citizens.
the walker, I'm looking at
Look at the walker.
You had that there for a minute.
Well, as I think about some of your personal stories, there was one delightful story about you and your brother. And so that you do use the family as kind of the one of the fonts for the material, right?
Right.
Yes.
Right. And that story, the New Friends, it's called New Friends, and it's about Barbies, but it's sort of, I took off from that from my daughter's love of Barbies, and so you can go, sort of, you know, as things strike you, you can go into the past, and I do a number of memoir projects with older people now when the occasion arises, and it's funny how you mention something and it'll take them way back, and then of course they take me back, and that's a wonderful part of those personal
Yeah,
stories.
and I think of this, there's a circle of life, and when you've gone far enough around and look back around the circle, you relive it, but you also see it in a totally different way
Yes.
than when you actually experienced it.
Yes, and sometimes that's good. Like if something's really embarrassing or even heartbreaking at the time, and you can look at it from a distance, it takes some of those embarrassing things and sort of channels them into, oh yes, that's life, that's humor, oftentimes, or not humor, maybe serious, but it's something that you can tell. And then that way, the audience can relate. And as you know, both of you telling stories to adults anyway, and even kids, they can't wait to tell you a story that's just like that. I have a story called The Recital, which I actually think I
Yes.
told here. And when I get finished with that, people will tell me a story about a time when their music fell off the piano or their flute broke. One woman told me about her flute breaking. They have stories that are brought up and they're so delighted they can't wait to tell it. Because I think the secret is, you know, that people love to tell stories.
Yeah. Actually, you're right. I can almost tell in an audience if something's triggered because they get a different look on their face, and you know they're not asleep, but they're someplace else. They're still listening with one ear, but they're right in their own story, and that always makes me happy. And invariably, that person, if they get a chance to come up and say, that story reminded me of, so, yeah.
Yeah. And then
Fun.
you've got a new story in a way. I mean, not that you would overtake their story, but you have some new part of the human experience that is part of you now.
And what I love is, I mean, I describe my family as the Cleavers of Connecticut. Nothing, middle class, just nothing, exciting. Mel Allen, who was an announcer for the New York Yankees, once said Gesundheit when my father sneezed when he was talking at a banquet where my father was attending. I mean, that's about as famous as we get. But my stories remind people of their stories, or I often tell personal stories where I have an epiphany, that all of a sudden I realize something, and I like to share that in case it brings up an epiphany in other people.
Does that sometimes come right while you're telling?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting
That's an interesting thing.
Yeah, it takes you into another zone entirely.
Oh, no. I have had an epiphany.
But
I tell about having epiphany.
Oh, you tell about it.
You don't have the
You add
epiphany.
included in the story.
Yes.
No, you don't go, holy cow, right in the middle of the story.
Right.
Oh, wait a minute.
The
You
light
don't believe
bulb.
what just happened.
Yeah.
With a light bulb over your
Yeah,
head.
no,
See
but
that
I
light
want
bulb?
people hearing about my previous epiphany to give them I mean, I have a story about my mother's hands, and it has in it that, I have my mother's hands. I may remember the way she looks by remembering different photographs, but I remember her hands. And there aren't any photos of them, and I have her hands. Well, after I told it once, twice I've told it where people have told me, a man came up to me and said, I never realized I have my father's hands.
Ah.
That is so nice.
Yes.
No.
And another time a woman said, I was born before my mother was married. My mother didn't ever marry my father. She married another man several years after I was born. And I was always treated as the odd one out. And I would spend hours up in the attic looking through the family photographs, trying to find somebody I looked like. And it wasn't until I just heard your story that I realized I have my mother's hands.
Oh.
Very nice.
And so,
yes.
So
I mean, you can't estimate a value on those kinds of things, and they happen all the time.
And so it's my privilege. I was so privileged to hear that.
Right.
And so I don't tell my stories because I think they're, people want to go home and tell them. It's that I hope it will trigger something in their own lives and will give them something they've never had before.
Right. Especially with older people, just to continue that, I find that once they know that you really want to listen to their story, then they are ready to tell. And it's just such a joy to see them talking about something and seeing the interest on your face. And it carries it along. And I think it's a blessing for them, and it's a blessing for the person listening.
Yeah.
And the quality of storytelling and that we're talking about, I think, has got a physical metaphor, and that's the concept of resonance. If a tuning fork is going off here and the same thing is over here, then they resonate. And I think that's part of it. There's a universality to some of the points of the story that you're telling, and not everybody will resonate with it. Those that do make it special for everybody, particularly if you can get the feedback that it's resonated. But it's just a real experience. Mary, we were talking about St. Patrick's Day, and you being Irish, but you're really here first as
you taking out the green cup.
Green cup, yes.
My green
we tried to make it kind of the theme for the day. Yep. As Mary Murphy, a storyteller, so you can tell us a story in any genre, anything you want. It's open season for you to tell any story you want.
Well, since this is the time of year, and of course we are in March, and so I could either do a basketball story or Irish story. So I think
Irish.
We did the basketball story.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's right.
Julia
Child.
You tried to do a basketball story.
All right, well, I've got a story, but it starts with St. Patrick, a toast to St. Patrick. St. Patrick was a gentleman who, through strategy and strife, sold all the snakes from Ireland. Here's toasting to himself, But not too many toastings, lest you lose yourself and then forget the good St. Patrick and see all those snakes again. Well, you all heard tell of the blessed St. Patrick and how he drove all the serpents and all manner of venomous things out of Ireland, how he bothered all the varmints entirely. But for all that, there was one old serpent who was too cunning to let himself be talked out of the country or made to drown himself. St. Patrick didn't well know how to manage this fellow, until at long last he bethought himself, and he got himself a strong iron chest with 9 bolts upon it. And then one fine morning he walks up to the place where the serpent used to keep. Now the serpent, who didn't like the saint at all, and small blame to him for that, began to hiss and show his teeth at him like anything. "There now," says St. Patrick, "what's the use of making such a piece of work about a gentleman like myself coming to see you? 'Tis a nice house I have got built for you again the winter, for I'm going to civilize the whole country, man and beast, and you can come and look at it whenever you please, and 'tis myself will be glad to see you." Now the serpent, hearing such smooth words, thought that though St. Patrick had drove all the rest of the serpents into the sea, he meant no harm to himself. And so he slides up to see the saint in the house he's got built for him. But when he saw that heavy iron chest with 9 bolts upon it, he thought himself betrayed and was for making off from there as fast as possible. I think it's too small it is for me, St. Patrick. Thank you very much." And St. Patrick said, "Stop if you please. You're out in that, my boy, anyhow. I'm sure it will fit you completely. And I'll tell you what, if you'll only try to get in, I'll bet you a gallon of porter that all of you will fit inside that chest." Now, it was great joy to the serpent, the thoughts of doing St. Patrick out of a gallon of porter. And he was very thirsty after his long slide up to see St. Patrick. So, swelling himself up as big as he could, in he got to the chest, all but a little bit of his tail. "There, now you see, I can't get in my tail. The house is too small for me. I've won the bet." And what does St. Patrick do? But he comes up behind the heavy iron lid of the chest, and putting his 2 hands to it, down he slapped it with a bang like thunder. When the rogue of a serpent saw that heavy iron chest coming down on top of him, and with his tail like a shot, for fear of being whipped right off him, St. Patrick began at once to bolt the 9 iron bolts. "Oh, murder, St. Patrick, won't you let me out? I've lost the bet fairly, and I'll pay you the gallon like a man." "Let you out?" said St. Patrick. "To be sure I will, by all manner of means, but you see, I haven't time just now, so you must wait till tomorrow." What does St. Patrick do? But he picks up that heavy iron chest with the serpent still inside, and he pitches it into the lake there, where it is to this hour for certain. And many as a living man has heard the serpent crying out underneath the water, "Is it tomorrow yet?" Which, to be sure, it never can be. And that's how St. Patrick drove the last of the serpents out of Ireland, or so I've been told.
And who told you that? Glory be, who told you
Glory
that?
be, I found that story in a book, and I recently came across another version of it, and it's not Gaelic, but you know how in Irish stories there's sometimes such a heavy brogue written right into the story? I could barely make it out, and about halfway through I realized it was the same story. It was an old book. It was falling apart, and it was just collected by another storyteller with a few additions, a few
And he actually wrote the brogue in.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Right. Like you were saying, divil
Yep.
instead of devil,
Divil.
that kind of thing.
Divil.
So you almost had to read it slowly out loud. And when you heard it,
Right.
you understood it rather
Right.
than seeing it.
Right. And I began to say, well, this is my story that I always tell. But most stories, as you know, in that kind of genre, don't have an author.
Right.
So I have no idea, just passed down in the oral tradition, I think.
Fun story, fun story.
Good.
You come to appreciate the way the Irish kind of build on the theme, because there's the snakes and St. Patrick and it's just part of their culture. And it's not that other cultures don't have stories, don't get me wrong, but just that there's something about the Irish way of weaving the tale, as it were.
Oh, you just like the porter part.
I did like the porter part. I did.
Porter, I
Porter's
think it's
a dark,
beer.
dark beer.
Oh, a dark beer. Okay.
It's like Guinness is a porter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Guinness is a porter.
Okay. Well, what's poteen then? Poteen.
Poteen is more like White Lightning. It's a distilled spirit.
It's in Appalachia. They call that
Moonshine.
White Lightning.
moonshine.
Oh, okay. So it's like kind of made at home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And it's grain based as opposed, or grain based as opposed to beer, which is grain based but not distilled. And to get the porter, you roast or toast the barley, and that makes it darker than the lagers.
I'm writing this down. I'm taking notes.
Well, I learned this.
Like Julia Child.
My friend and storytelling partner Ken Bushman makes his own beer and grows his own hops. So I've acquired a kind of a little bit of an understanding of it, but that much I understand.
He grows his hops. Huh?
He grows his own hops. Yeah.
It's for another show, I know, but that's interesting.
Now, tell us a little bit about your own background in your Irish roots. Do you have a handle on that in terms of where the Murphys came from originally?
Well, it's funny. I've always known that my father was an orphan. He had distant family, but he grew up in an orphanage. But the name Murphy, in our case, is more of a Scots-Irish.
Ah.
You say Scotch-Irish? Or
Scotch-Irish, yeah.
Scotch-Irish, yes. And so that we don't know too much about because we just don't know too much about his family. But on the other side, I was hoping you would ask me that because the floods. My mother was a flood, and my Aunt Dorothy was a flood, and she went looking. She went searching for family, and she actually came up. She has an aunt named Edgeworth, and that Edgeworth was my great aunt. And she found out that there was this novelist, a famous female novelist of the time, which would be the 18th century, called Maria Edgeworth. I don't know if you've heard of Maria Edgeworth, but she wrote novels. And, not many people did that at this time. She knew Sir Walter Scott, and she was a friend of his and all that. And she wrote a book called Castle Rackrent. That was her claim to fame, which I don't think you could claim it as famous nowadays. But there are Dover editions out, and my aunt had gotten one, and I saw it. And it's a kind of a lighthearted, funny book about the Irish and the way they live and that kind of thing. So with the Edgeworth so deeply embedded in Ireland, and my aunt went over and there was a woman there portraying Maria Edgeworth.
Oh, really?
And a Maria Edgeworth festival. And now, of course, you're going to ask me what town that was, but I don't remember. It was in the south of Ireland. But so she actually met her famous relative. And then the woman, dresses in the costume, and she speaks as though she were Maria Edgeworth. And you buy her a drink, and she'll talk regular to you.
There you go.
For as long as you want.
Well, it seems to me that you probably have to do a little pilgrimage.
I know. I would love to. I would love to. This is something I would love to do, is go to Ireland. Have either of you been to
Yeah, I've been to Ireland.
Ireland? Yeah. Oh, nice. Nice.
I don't know where my Irish roots come from, but my grandmother was a Kylie, and her grandmother was a Shaughnessy.
Oh.
And that was Winifred Shaughnessy Kylie, Mary Winifred Kylie, Catherine Winifred Ike.
Oh, okay. Yes. How do you spell that last name? Ike?
Ike is not Irish.
Oh, that's not Irish.
My father was half Irish, half Kylie, and half Ike, which is German.
German. Okay,
My
yes.
mother said that was a very bad combination. Only good if you want stubborn square.
Yes.
I've spent time in the West. I have friends that have a place in Galway, and I'd go back in the drop if I had. It's fun.
They say the best part about Ireland, well, one of the best parts, is the different colored greens. As you look at the landscape, it's all different greens.
Yeah.
And that means it rains half the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
A woman there told me, every day I leave the house with my sunglasses and my umbrella. Because I'm never quite sure what the weather's going to be like.
Yes, yes.
Well, we actually drove through Barbara McCarthy's hometown.
Oh, really?
Quill. That we've heard stories about. Barbara McCarthy is another storyteller from Saratoga now. And we were on our way to a little place called Beer, where there's a great castle and a museum. And after we'd finished the tour, we asked for a place for lunch. Came down the street, and there was Kelly's Pub. And I have a kind of a very close friend whose name is Aaron Kelly. So we went in and we had lunch with the crew, and we asked for some coasters. And the owner who was waiting on us says, "Coasters you want for a souvenir?" And I told him why we wanted them. He says, "Oh, I got better than that." And he comes back with 2 hats that say Kelly's Pub Beer. And we had our picture taken with him in the tap of Guinness. And it's just a wonderful memory. And we have that picture on our refrigerator door, and Erin Kelly has it on her refrigerator door in Washington, D.C. Nice. So there you go. You can just make these connections right there.
Oh, yes, yes.
So you got to go. If you haven't been to Ireland, anybody, go to Ireland. And
someone sent me a photograph one time of a bar that's also called, is actually called Shanachie. That's the name of the bar, and I know that that is an Irish word that means storytelling.
Right.
So there must be.
And it does pay to have roots there, and if you don't have roots there, you know, I've talked to several people who have been with Kevin McCrell, the musician and artist up in Saratoga, and he loves to take people on tour with him, and he can do more in a pub than most people can do in their lifetime. So I would imagine if I go back, I might even think about going with Kevin sometime, because I think that would
nice.
be a rip. Maybe we ought to talk a little bit about what's going on with storytelling. Then we're going to come back to you for another story.
Okay.
Right.
I'd like to kind of introduce a new venue that I'm starting in Schenectady. As many of you may know, I'm really into Schenectady history, and I'm a real strong fan of the Stockade District, the historic district. And Arthur's Market has reopened. It's one of the oldest grocery stores in town, goes back to 1790. And it's right on the corner of Ferry Street and Front Street at the statue of Lawrence the Indian. And I tell stories about statue. So I've decided that we're going to have a storytelling spoken word open mic at Arthur's Market on the first Tuesday of every month. And it's Tuesday Tales at Arthur's Market. And 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock, sign-ups if you want to tell. We will have a featured storyteller of about 20 minutes or so. I will be the first featured storyteller of this kickoff, and it will be a CD release party for my CD, If the Portraits Could Talk, which is a set of music and stories that relate to 30 people whose portraits were painted in the 1700s. And it'll be great. There's a light fare, gourmet fare that's available. So if you came a little early, you could have dinner or dessert or whatever during the stories. And we'd love to see you. And we'll get an email out about it. And there'll be, first Tuesday of every month, there'll be storytelling in the Stockade. Thanks, Kate.
And on the following week, on Wednesday, March 12th, there will be the storytelling open mic up at Cafe Lena this month. And our featured teller there is our good friend, Marnie Gillard.
Marnie's going to be at Cafe Lena. And Lena's is a great spot. If you haven't been to Lena's, use this as an opportunity to try out Lena's. Mm-hmm. And you climb up those stairs that Bob Dylan and Gordon Lightfoot and Utah Phillips and all these famous people have been up to perform. And you'll be there in that intimate space with some great storytellers. And there's $3 cover to support the old place. It's a not-for-profit organization. And a great cookie and a good cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm. And glory be, isn't it going to be the 109th Story Sunday on the eve of St. Patrick's Day, Sunday, March 16th, 5 to 8, with our very own Mary Murphy and Nancy Marie Payne.
Oh, no kidding.
No kidding.
Now, Mary, tell me just a little bit. Do the angels sing on the eve of St. Patrick's?
Well, to me they do.
Oh, okay.
Not to every Irishman, I don't think.
Okay,
but to me they do.
So if you're looking to the answer for that question.
You have to live a blameless life, and you have to not drink anything like I just did.
Oh, man. Well, there'll be no angels singing for me, I'll tell you.
A blameless life.
A blameless life.
Thank you.
Not just a day?
No.
All right, so please join us for that. It's a show not to be missed. And that will be our last Story Sunday of our 15th season at the Glenn Sanders Mansion. But we'll be back in the fall.
There is one other thing that I'm conspiring on.
Only one?
Well, this is only one that's probably in the calendar. On April 6th at the GE Theater in Proctor's, we're having a viewing of Stepping Towards the Lion, which is the movie that John Lydon, a young St. Rose student now, filmed about his experience at Children at the Well, the storytelling developmental program of the Interfaith Story Circle. It is a great, powerful movie, and I say powerful because out of the group came the story of one of the tellers who is Muslim and was bullied in school. And so it becomes a profile of the power of story to build in some reconciliation in the circumstances of the young boy, and also some examples of the method of how the story can help create some balance in more than one life. There'll be a donation to cover the costs of the film it's up and running now. It's under review by several festivals for prizes. It's going to be a good opportunity, and so we'll get you word on that, and we hope to see you at Proctor's on April 6th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So you can come and graze the green market, which will still be indoors at that point in time.
Okay, so that's a Sunday.
That's a Sunday. So it's a story Sunday, but it's not at the Glenn Sanders. How's that?
Well, it's like a delayed word play or something.
Right. And we've been thinking about getting that out at that side of the community for some time. And we hope to have the film with a little bit of feedback from the participants and the director, and also a resource from some of the people that are working on bullying in the Schenectady schools and at Schenectady Community College. So it should be a good learning experience, but it's going to be evocative, cause some things to bubble up, and we'll give you an opportunity to share. So look forward to that.
And I'll put the link for the trailer for that on this slide that you're looking at right now.
There you go. There you go.
Okay. And then one other thing back in March is our next storytelling meeting, which is happening here at the Colonie Town Library, Tuesday, March 18th, 6:30 to 8:30. Please, only telling, no reading. Listeners are very, very welcome. And this is where people can share stories under development, and they can get feedback if they like. Mm-hmm. They can ask for just appreciations, which are the nice things, or they can ask, they can entertain suggestions.
And those are often nice too.
Right.
Right.
They're not, of course, as a boss that I used to have said, well, my 5-second analysis is. So, not all, it's good to hear the suggestions, especially when there's confusion, Or another thing that Michael Parent from Maine said, he likes to have his listeners say, likes to ask his listeners, have you heard too much? Did you hear too much of something? Did you hear not enough of something else? Too much and not enough.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's
good way of getting feedback, actually.
Yeah, and it's also we do it as kind, collaborative.
Yeah.
Compatriots, colleagues.
Right.
There we go.
We are a community. We are a
yes,
community.
And we're not there to cut you off at your knees. And then our last wordplay of our 7th season at Proctor's is Second Chances, where we'll have Jane Ainsley, Claire Beetlestone, Carol Conley, what's his name, Margaret French, Marnie Gillard, Elliot Nieves, Barbara Palumbo, and Sandy Schumann. Sunday, March 23rd, 2 p.m., following the Green Market. Be there or be square. $4 off coupon on our website, storycircle@proctors.org.
And the Green Market will also be indoors then, so the same goes. If you haven't hit the Green Market, that's a great thing to do. And they also have some luscious food that you can chow down with for lunch, and then come listen to stories.
And if there's also our YouTube channel, which you can find by going to storycircle@proctors.org and clicking on YouTube, where we have over 100 stories now. I think over 15,000 have been listened to in a little over 2 years.
And I must plug that because I refer a lot of people to that who didn't know about it. Somebody will be looking for a storyteller, or somebody will be looking for a story, or in the topic is pertinent. And I just send them, I said, go look for Mary Murphy on the YouTube thing, and there's that story. So if you haven't checked it out, it's fun.
And especially if you have friends who go, you listen to storytelling? Is that like somebody reading a children's book in the library? Which is a fine thing to do. But we think of storytelling as a one-person performer, a solo performer with the excitement and the intensity of a solo performer, but the intimacy of a one-on-one conversation.
Mm-hmm. It really is.
Because most storytellers do not work in the dark.
Right.
Like theater people do. No offense, theater people. But theater people are pretending to be somebody else, and they're pretending the audience isn't there. Most storytellers like to look at their audience and watch their faces. And when they all go blank, a good storyteller will go, they didn't get what I just said. Mm-hmm. What do I have to tell this audience to get them back into the story? Mm-hmm. So. Anyways, speaking of stories, and our time is flowing by, Mary, do you have another story to share with us?
Yes. I'll just say one thing about the idea of the audience. It's wonderful to look out and have the audience be the person that keeps feeding you their interest, and you're responding to them. But when there's a person right in the center row that's fallen asleep, that's always a...
Well, I can kind of identify with that person, too.
Yeah.
But actually, I had a friend compliment me once. I was doing a performance for a number of families. They were all people I knew. And she said, it was so wonderful the way your story put my child to sleep.
Oh, gee.
And I looked at her. She said, well, you made it such a comfortable environment.
Yes.
And I went, oh, thank you. And I don't know if you're old enough, Mary, but I'm old enough that sometimes I just falls asleep, It just kind of happens.
Oh,
yes. And nothing I can do except standing up and doing jumping jacks will prevent it from happening.
Right.
So I give them a little blessing, and then I don't look back at them. I concentrate on the ones who are still awake.
Right. That's all you can do.
We have
advice.
We have code in my house, and I think I'll go read in my chair. Kind of.
Okay, but back to your story, Mary.
All right. Well, I do have another Irish story for you. Thank you for asking me. This is called One Wish. One time, there was a young man and his wife who lived on a farm in County Mayo. The young man's parents lived with them, and the farm was very poor, and they had a landlord. They didn't own the property, so half of everything they grew had to go to the landlord. And like every family, they suffered sorrows. The man's wife was, and the young man had tried for 5 years to have a child of their own, but no child had been born to them. And the young man's mother was blind and had been blind for 10 years. But the family stayed together, and the young man was able to keep them well and happy and food on the table until a blight came on the potato crop and starvation came to the door. And then there was no food, and the young man had to do everything in his power to get food to put on the table for the family. And there was only one thing to do: to go into the landlord's estate and poach some game. Now, getting caught at that would mean that you'd be hung right away. But the landlord was one of the hard ones. And he thought maybe he could take his axe and sneak around in the landlord's property. He had a big forest where he and his friends hunted for game, for sport. And if he found something, he could keep his family alive. So he got an old axe, the only weapon he had, and he sharpened it. And then one morning at dawn, he went into the landlord's forest. And he hunted all day, always keeping watch for the horsemen that were riding around looking for people that were poaching game. And he found nothing until just at dusk, when he knew he had cornered an animal in a glen. And he went in, and he saw the most beautiful animal he'd ever seen in his life. It was a white deer I don't know if you've ever seen a white deer. I never have. But it sounds so beautiful, and this young man was entranced. But at the same time, he was very sad because he had to kill the white deer in order to provide food for his family. And so he raised up his axe, and he was about to bring it down on top of the white deer when it spoke to him. It said, "If you kill me, you'll be hanged, but if you let me live, I will grant you one wish." The young man had his axe raised. It was frozen. He thought that the hunger must be affecting him. He's hallucinating, and he started to bring it down again. And the white deer said, "Listen, you may be able to save your family. Think about it. I'll be here, just in this place, tomorrow morning. And you can kill me then if you want to, or you can take a wish." So with that, the young man brought the axe down. He was in a trance as he turned around and just left the forest. And on his walk home, the thought came back to him. He could save his family. And the first person he saw at his house was his father. His father was waiting by the gate. And when he saw that he didn't have anything in his arms to eat, the father was devastated. But the young man told him about the wish and the white deer. Oh, and the father said, "Son, that's all right. Wish for gold. Gold will solve all our problems." Oh, and the young man, he knew it was true, and he loved his father very much. But he thought, maybe he'd better ask his mother what she thought. He went to his mother and told about the gold that his father wanted and the white deer and the wish. And the mother said, "Oh, son, I know we need money. I know we need gold. But for 10 years now, I've lost my eyesight. I've been blind. Sure, my eyesight being restored, that would be the best wish of all." And oh, the young man, he loved his mother very much, and he wanted to do that for her. But he thought he should ask his wife. And of course, when he asked his wife, she sadly said, "Husband, I love your mother and father very much. But for 5 years now, we've waited for a child to be born to us, and no child has come to us. Truly, that would be the most precious wish of all." And the young man wanted a child more than anything in the world. And that night, he tossed and turned, couldn't sleep at all, just thought about those 3 wishes and how he wanted to give them to his family. He wanted to solve all their problems, but he could only have one wish. Perhaps he should kill the white deer, is what he thought. But in the morning, he'd made up his mind. He decided on a wish. He knew what he would do. He didn't take his axe back into the forest, but he went in. And there was that beautiful white deer, right where he'd left it. And the white deer looked up at him and saw that he didn't have a weapon and said, "Ah, you'll take a wish." And the young man said, I'll take a wish. And the white deer said, "Tell me what it is." And the young man squared his shoulders, and he took a deep breath. And he said, "I wish my mother could see my wife rocking our child in a golden cradle." And that one wish was granted to that young man, and the family lived happily after that. Now, being an Irishman,
Wow.
I'm wondering if I can tell one last little story. Is there time for one last
Yep.
story?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, because this is a kind of heartwarming Irish story involving wishes, once again, that we all think of when we think of Ireland.
my heart.
Yes, emerald green. It's about a little old lady. And she lived in County Mayo all by herself, except for her little cat Murphy, no relation to myself. And one time she was coming out of church on St. Patrick's Day when she spied a leprechaun hiding behind a stone wall. She crept up behind him and grabbed him, caught him in the twinkling of an eye. And he said, "Oh, you caught me fair and square. I'll give you me pot of gold." And she said, "I don't want your pot of gold. I want 3 wishes. So he said, all right, I'll grant you 3 wishes. And she took him home. And right away she said for the first wish, I wish I was rich instead of poor. And poof, there were £1,000,000 Irish pounds on the table. And she thought another minute and she said, I wish I was young and beautiful. And poof, she was young and beautiful. And she had to think for a few more seconds about her final wish. And then she knew. I wish me little cat Murphy were a handsome young man. And poof, Murphy was a handsome young man. And she said, oh, Murphy, is it really you? Aye, he said, 'tis. Now, aren't you sorry you had me fixed? That's the end of that story.
That's the end of that
well, I'll
story.
tell you, there was a,
Heartwarming.
heartwarming.
Cackles of your heart. Yeah.
Well, it did bring your temperature up a little bit. Yes.
Well, on that note, it is time for us to bring this show to an end.
This is
been
the
a-
Irish would call this a bit of a ceilidh,
ceilidh.
a bit of a house party. We haven't sung yet, but we haven't played any instruments, but we've had a good time and we've had a little bit of a
I
party.
didn't know how to pronounce that word. I know, I've
Ceilidh.
seen it. Ceilidh.
Ceilidh.
Thank you very much. Joe is a font of knowledge.
Well, I learned that from Anne-Marie McLaughlin, don't you know?
Yes.
That's where I heard all about ceilidhs.
Wonderful.
Yeah, whoever mapped our letters to the Irish language did a horrible job. Absolutely horrible job.
That's for sure.
Well, the time has come, but
Yes.
as they say in Ireland, may the road rise to meet you, and may the wind be ever at your back, and may the rain fall soft on your fields, the sun warm on your face, and until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope you will join us again.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning